Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and fresh from the super test we have something incredibly exciting today. This is the Panzerkampfwagen Tiger MAUS 120T, which I guess stands for 120 tons. And this thing looks as if it's the amalgamation of a Moisian with an E100 turret. Now, first let me clarify that everything that you see today is not final. Characteristics are very much subject to change, but I really wanted to get in and talk about a vehicle that looks very exciting inside World of Tanks. You know how much I love my German heavies, as they were my first heavy tanks that I ever played back in 2011. So we don't have any screenshots of the Tiger MAUS, but we do have this picture from what we can deduce quite a lot about the vehicle. So firstly, the fact that this vehicle weighs 120 tons is a bit of a giveaway. The E100 weighs just under 130 tons, while the one and only MAUS weighs a staggering 188 tons. However, upon clear inspection of this hull, it is clear which part is Tiger and which part is MAUS. One of the things that's a bit mysterious when looking at this, however, is the fact that this hull does have a machine gun port on the front. And if we take a look on the front of the E100's hull and we look visually, it is not there. However, if we were to go and take a look at a Moisian, you can clearly see that it does have the machine gun on the front of the vehicle. However, if any of you were thinking that this may or may not be a weak point on the front of the tank, even though the Moisian visually has a machine gun port, if we look at the live model, it doesn't actually exist. Accordingly, I'm only guessing if this is or is not going to be a weak point. But if it is, it'll be really annoying to have a big flat front on the vehicle where your opponents are going to be able to shoot, even though probably the lower plate isn't the best on this tank. But considering it's going to be at tier 9 and not tier 10, and it will meet tier 7 tanks, yeah, perhaps having a weak point is a good idea. The other thing that's confusing about this tank is clearly we can see that the side of what looks like a MAUS's turret is actually curved. And all of you MAUS lovers out there will know that the side of the MAUS's turret is completely flat. However, its baby brother, the Moisian at tier 9, we can see the curve on the turret along here. So this does look as if it's more of a Moisian turret than a MAUS turret. However, more confusion occurs when we take a look at the fact that this one actually has the second gun attached to the barrel, which doesn't actually exist on the Moisian, but it does exist on the MAUS. To add to this, while the picture's been taken at a very funny angle, it doesn't really look like there's a weak point on top of the Tiger MAUS that you could see clearly even from an angle like this on the Moisian. Accordingly, it looks like Wargaming want to kind of get rid of the weak point on top of this vehicle while still making the side of the turret weaker than a MAUS. And everyone knows that when you're shooting at a Moisian, it's a lot easier to hit the side of the turret because of the way that it's angled. However, on a MAUS, you can't really go through the side of this thing's turret until it's angled all the way like this because of that lack of the curve that becomes such a weak point on the Moisian. So it looks like with the Tiger MAUS, which is going to be at tier 9, Wargaming want to keep this side weak point if it over angles its turret, but perhaps removing the weak point that the Moisian has on top, which can be oh so annoying from working that tank on a ridgeline. With regards to weight, I didn't realize this, but the E100's turret actually weighs exactly the same as the MAUS. As we can see here, 58 tons on the MAUS's turret, and the E100's turret itself is once again 58 tons. And so accordingly, where the design actually sheds all of its weight will be the hull, which is probably why this one is going to be 120 tons, which is 10 tons less than an E100, and it would be perfectly reasonable why if this was a Moisian turret, which weighs 50 tons, that would make sense. If you take an E100 and you slap a Moisian turret on it, it weighs 8 tons less. Considering that this vehicle weighs about 9.5 tons less than an E100, we've clearly got an overall design idea for what Wargaming are going with. So now that we've, in a long-winded way, figured out what this tank actually is, why don't we take a look at the statistics of the tank so you can see whether it's actually going to be worth it on the battlefield. So you can get a better idea, I've taken all of the statistics from the infogram that Wargaming have provided and I've put them into an Excel document so we can compare the Tiger MAUS, and remember all of its statistics are subject to change, to the Moisian and also the classic E75. Immediately we notice that all of these tanks have 128mm caliber guns. However, the Tiger MAUS, unlike the Moisian, packs the same alpha damage as the E75 and the E100 at 530. This is a nice advantage to have, and anyone who plays the MAUS will know that the vehicle definitely feels it's on the lower end of the alpha damage compared to when you go and even use the high DPM gun on the E100. Everything else about these tanks is identical to the E75. The penetrations are the same across the guns, and that's because the E75 used to have 490 alpha damage, and Wargaming, I guess when they changed the two guns between the Moistion and the E75, just left all the ammunition as it is. 246 pen is great for standard. 311 for gold is amazing considering it's APCR on this vehicle. It's not heat, so that means it's still going to get those 2 degrees of normalization. And the HE pen of 65, it's pretty good if you're shooting at lightly armored targets. Now the rate of fire of the Tiger MAUS is 3.87 rounds per minute, which actually means that this vehicle's firing slightly faster than the E75. That gives this tank a definite DPM advantage over the Moistion, but it's practically the same as the E75. Accordingly, the Tiger MAUS, firepower-wise, is looking like quite a contender if the rest of the vehicle can live up to its awesome firepower start. Next, let's take a look at the gun handling. 0.37 accuracy, exactly the same as the E75. 2.4 seconds aim time, exactly the same as the E75. However, 7 degrees of gun depression on this tank, which is the same as the E100, is 1 degree less than the Moistion in the E75, which will definitely annoy all of you out there who like to work a ridgeline. The elevation, 23 degrees, more than flexible enough, and it is an advantage over the E75, which actually has quite limited gun elevation of only 15 degrees. The turret traverse on the Tiger MAUS is actually significantly better than the Moistion and better than the E75. So that means that you're going to quickly be able to angle the turret to be able to not give your opponents a flat turret front to fire at, which every Moistion and MAUS drivers is one of the worst things that you could ever do with the vehicle. Okay, so now onto the mobility. How much engine power does a 120-ton tank have? Well, it's a 1,200 horsepower engine, which means that this vehicle will get a power to weight ratio of 10, which is practically the same as the Moistion and the E75. One of the funny things about engine power on German tanks is that TanksGG has actually calculated the true engine power that these vehicles have, and not the semi-fake one that you see inside the garage. On a tank like the MAUS, for example, you're actually getting 100 extra horsepower. And on the Moistion, it's actually nearly 200 extra horsepower. So don't believe everything that you see in game and use awesome resources like TanksGG to calculate real statistics. Accordingly, this means that the Tiger MAUS might end up having a significant power to weight advantage over the Moistion or the E75 if it's getting a similar kind of treatment. The Tiger MAUS's 32 kilometers an hour top speed puts it right in between the Moistion and the E75, and it'll be very interesting to see what kind of field mods that this vehicle gets. The E75 gets versatile field mods, which means that it gets reverse speed increase for its final field mod, whereas the Moistion gets assault field mods, which means that it will get a 2 kilometer an hour forward increase. So depending on what designation Wargaming give this, it could end up going 34 kilometers an hour once you've got all of the field mods. And driving a 120-ton tank at 34 base, which you could easily get up to 40 kilometers an hour if you were able to use a turbo on this tank. Well, you will be able to use a turbo. I mean, if you choose to use a turbo, that could be some very significant ramming damage. Add to this, to the fact that Wargaming are thinking of making this vehicle the fastest German tank backwards in this comparison of 16 kilometers an hour. And this thing could very easily be able to control the engagement and stop its opponents from being able to flank it. Add to this an impressive hull traverse of 28 degrees, and this is looking like one of the more mobile, super heavy tanks in the game, especially at tier 9. So now let's take a look at the armor of the Tiger MAUS, and this is where it looks like it could be really good news for the vehicle. 200 at the front, 120 at the side, and 130 at the rear. So it's actually got better rear armor than it does have on the side of this tank. And on the turret, it's 300 at the front, 150 on the side, and 140 at the rear. This frontal turret armor kind of confuses me, because when we look at the MAUS, it's 260, and this is reproducible with the tank's model, as we can see here. And if we take a look at the E100, it's 270, which is what's reproducible at the front of the vehicle. I got a funny feeling that maybe Wargaming are giving an effective value here, but that wouldn't make sense because these are usually raw statistics. So are Wargaming planning on making the Tiger MAUS have a better turret than the real MAUS? If they were to do that, that would mean that gold rounds against an angled Tiger MAUS turret would not be effective. The only problem, as I highlighted earlier, with the way that the turret looks like it's curved to the side, is that if you angle the front to be able to improve the weakness, that as with the Moistion, as soon as you start to angle that turret to the side, that the side becomes the weakness itself. All in all, that is the standout feature of the Tiger Mouse's armor. As we can see, all of these are fairly similar. But armor doesn't mean anything if you don't have the durability to go along with it. We can see that the Tiger Mouse's hit points is the same as the E75 at 1,950. That's kind of disappointing because the Moistion gets 2,300, and so a lot of people would end up wanting to use a durability device on this vehicle to be able to pump that up a little bit, but they're not going to be getting nearly as much value on the Tiger Mouse as they would do on the Moistion. Accordingly, maybe you'd want to try and pump up the mobility and the damage of this tank instead with something like gun rammer defense, or maybe gun rammer and avert stabs to be able to get better gun handling, along with a turbo to increase the mobility of the vehicle into something that could actually get to the heavy tank flanks as fast as most other heavies, but pack more of a punch with bigger armor once it gets there. To top it all off, the Tiger Mouse has 400 meters view range, which means that you will never have to use coated optics on this tank as soon as you get all of the field mods and you have a reasonably good crew. So all in all, the Tiger Mouse, the most exciting name that you can have in World of Tanks, is shaping up to be a fairly interesting vehicle at tier 9. A Moistion turret with some significant changes, an E100 hull with some weaknesses that Wargaming may or may not choose to model, and the possibility of a god tier turret with 300 millimeters of base armor that would mean that tier 7s and 8s would have no chance of being able to go through it reliably even with gold. All in all, that makes the Tiger Mouse one to keep an eye on. But once again, let me clarify that all of these statistics are not final and subject to change. And if any of you like the look of this vehicle and you're thinking, oh, I've got to prepare a German crew for it, it uses a very standard commander, gunner, driver, radio operator, and 2 loaders. So if you've probably played German heavy tanks like most people in the game, you'll have a half decent crew for it already. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, that was my first look at the Panzerkampfwagen Tiger Mouse 120. Really hope you enjoyed the video today. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down, and let me know what you think about this tank in the comments down below. Do you think it looks like a boring Frankenstein clone, or do you think there's enough differences about this tank to be able to pique your interest? And what do you think all about the fact that it kind of has the Mouse's extra gun, but it doesn't have the weak point that the Moistion has? It has that curved Moistion turret. There's so much to break down about this tank. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.